Okay, so welcome to episode 2 of the eyecare.education podcast. And today we have Peter Charlesworth, who's going to talk to us all about education, CET, and fitness to practice. So we've got a few different discussion points to go through. But first of all, we'll start with hearing a bit about Peter himself and how he got to where he is in optics. So do you want to tell us about your story, Peter?
Hello, Stuart. Yeah, I think we should say that we're recording this in lockdown. I'm locked down in Scotland, and you're locked down at home as well. So we're more than 2 meters apart. So we are following due guidance and everything. So yeah, I mean, obviously we met at the eyecare conference in Glasgow, and you were helping us organised that for a while, and going to be organising that going forward. I'm an optometrist, and I've been an optometrist for 30 years or so, except I'm not a real optometrist anymore. So I spent the first 15 years working in practice, but I also worked at the University of Bradford, teaching students there. I had a job called a tutor practitioner for Boots. So I spent half of my week working for Boots in practice and half of my week working as a lecturer at Bradford University. And then when Boots got rid of that position in the early 2000s, I set up on my own, and I started delivering CET. It was around about the time when CET, people were talking about CET becoming compulsory. There seemed to be an appetite for more and different ways of delivering that. We started off doing a thing called net lectures. Anybody who's old enough might remember getting a CD in the post that said net lectures on it. So broadband wasn't quite up to delivering video and audio at the same time. So we delivered it on CD, and at the peak, I think we were sending out about 3,000 CDs every month. And then, of course, things eventually went on to broadband, and that's how we have CETpoints.com now. We've got more than 120 hours worth of CET covering all the different competencies for all the different types of registrant.
So with CETpoints.com as well, you do more than just optics, don't you?
CETpoints.com is just really aimed at optometrists and dispensing opticians. So it has, as I said, it covers therapeutic optometry, it covers dispensing, all of the competencies for that, it covers all the competencies for optometrists and contact lens opticians as well. So yeah, that is just squarely aimed at optometry and dispensing optics. But yeah, the company, the company is called Effective Medical Education, and we do all forms of different medical education. So we do obviously a lot of education for contact lens companies, but also drugs companies. We train doctors, nurses, and all different types of healthcare professionals.
So how does their format differ to the format we have with CET in optics?
Sorry, I missed that, Stuart.
So with the format for the other medical professions, how does that differ to the optical setup?
I think in terms of kind of the requirement, it's similar in terms of the actual time that it takes to do. I think that the requirement is very similar. So all of the different professions, all the different medical professions have to do a certain amount of what we would call CET, what they would call CPD, within a given period. Sometimes that's a year, sometimes that's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years. I think what's different is the way that it gets checked. So in optometry, we have quite a rigid system where providers have to be approved in advance. Those providers apply to run courses or distance learning or whatever it is, and that has to be approved by the GOC before they run it. And that's really I was going to say that's the only way to get CET points, but it isn't, is it? Because registrants can register peer review as well. But again, it has to be registered in advance. And then it's down to the provider to award the points to the people who came. And the reason that it's like that is because there's no revalidation process in optics. So that is meant to kind of replace that, so that the GOC at any point can say, well, we know how much continuing education people have done. Whereas the other healthcare professions take a slightly different approach. So doctors have to collect all of their stuff. They can collect certificates. They can just write down what they've done themselves. If they write it down, they have to write down why they did it and reflect on what they learned out of it. And then annually, that gets reviewed by a more senior person in their organisation. And then after 5 years, that gets all of that, along with everything else that they've done, gets reviewed by an individual in their trust or their organisation, whose job it is to revalidate doctors. And so they just check that they've done everything properly, and then they get signed off for another 5 years. And then other professions, HCPC, they do kind of spot checks. So again, it's self-regulating. So people have to they have to keep a portfolio of what they've done, and then every year the HCPC will ask a sample of people, between 2 and 5% of all of their registrants. They'll ask them for that portfolio, to see that portfolio. So I suspect, in fact, I know that what really happens for many people, and that is that they don't keep a portfolio until they get that letter saying, we're going to check it, and then they frantically scrape around for a couple of weeks trying to put that portfolio together, or at least build on it so that it's complete. So I don't know. I mean, I think in terms of requirement, they're all similar, but the way that they get checked is different.
Is it competency led as well? So does a doctor have to cover a range of topics, a range of subjects, or is it more relevant to what they actually do in practice themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there is a debate at the moment, isn't there, in the GOC's educational review as to whether CET should be competency based, and currently it is in optometry, and it isn't really in other health professions, certainly not for doctors. That doesn't mean that you can just do CPD on anything you want. So obviously, as a doctor, you need to look at your scope of practice and then consider from your scope of practice what it is that you need to do. So are there holes in your understanding and your knowledge? In that case, you would work on those. Are there specialisms that you're doing, in which case you want to build on those? And I guess, within medicine, there's a much wider range of scopes of practice. But even in optometry and dispensing optics, there are different scopes of practice. And the GOC already asks you to fill in a scope of practice on that My CET system before you start each cycle, each CET cycle. So, thinking about fitting your training requirements in with what you actually do is a really good idea. The competencies that we use in optometry are the competencies that are used for final year students at university. So some of them are a little bit weird. Some of them are a bit, can you actually do ophthalmoscopy? Well, any optometrist can do ophthalmoscopy. That's what they do every day, many times every day. So sometimes the competencies don't really fit with CET, and I think that's the argument really, is that we should give people a bit more freedom to think about what it is that they actually need, and then allow them to do that regardless of whether it actually fits some final year competency or not. Yeah,
I mean, I'm sort of split on competency-based CET, because from a provider point of view, it's helpful because it gives me a list of things that need to be covered, and it's easy to sort of target what you're actually presenting to cover those different competencies. But from a practitioner point of view, I think some of them don't seem as relevant to you, so you're less interested in them, and you don't sort of seek out those points. And I think sometimes it can become a little bit of a tick box exercise in terms of, for example, binocular vision. A lot of optoms seem to struggle to get the binocular vision competency covered. So have they actually got a genuine interest in binocular vision? Is it something that's within their scope of practice, or is it something that they need to know about to tick that box to maintain the registration?
Well, the General Optical Council, of course, would say that they need to know a bit about binocular vision, because they'll see patients who've got binocular vision problems, and even if they're not specialising in it, then they need to know about phorias, they need to know about trochas, they need to know when to refer people and when they can manage them in practice. So they'll say, well, that's why you have to meet those competencies. And that's true. And I think, that's the argument for using competencies. The argument against is, what if we want to do something a little bit more advanced in binocular vision? What if we want to talk to people who do specialise about binocular vision? It then becomes difficult to then map that to a competency. It becomes too advanced or too specialised. Or one that we had recently as a provider was hearing care. So we wanted to do some CET for optometrists and dispensing opticians about hearing care, and the GOC just would not approve it at all. And if you're working in a practice that's carrying out hearing care, you don't need to know everything about hearing aids and how hearing works and how it's tested, but you need to know enough about that to be able to spot the people who could benefit, talk to them a little bit about what might happen, and then get them booked in for an appointment if it's appropriate. Yeah. So you can see how that would be very useful, but the GOC said, well, that just doesn't fit within the competencies.
Yeah. I mean, we had a very similar case with a workshop that we're running this year, which is all about building a modern practice and understanding your demographic, your patients, what services and products you provide based on who's in your area and things like that, and looking at it from slightly from a business perspective in terms of what you need to know about your patients to provide the products and services they need, and also how to retain those patients, what offers and services you've got in place to retain patients. But it was really difficult to get it approved, because I think they viewed it purely as a business kind of training module rather than something that's relevant in practice. But from our point of view, most practices are owned by optoms or DOs, so they need to understand that business element to run a successful practice as much as they need to understand what goes on in the test room. So maybe a move to CDP will sort of help out in that sense.
Yeah, so you mean CPD, not CDP, but we all know what you mean, Stuart. We know what you mean. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. But, I think it's difficult for that business bit, isn't it? Because we've all been to CET that's been a thinly veiled sales pitch, and you just think, no, this is not CET. You get lost. You're just trying to sell me a product. But business isn't all about selling, is it? So I think there is already a requirement within CET to make it evidence-based and unbiased. And sometimes unbiased just means that you're going to talk about all the different products that are available, or sometimes you're just going to talk about things generically without raising product names. And if CET is sponsored, you kind of expect the sponsor's going to mention their product. It would be unreasonable not to expect that, but you don't want to you don't want to have that pushed down your throat and tell that product is the best product and all the other ones are rubbish, because clearly that's not true. So that's one side of business. But then the other side of business is being able to run a practice, being able to show leadership, management skills, and all of those are really important if you're going to provide good patient care. So again, we all know of opticians' practices that are just really badly run, and you wonder where they get patients from and why patients keep coming back. And then there are other ones that are very successful and very well run. Well, that's down to the individuals who are doing it, and if you can help to build their skills in customer service and just the general leadership of that practice, then the patients benefit. So yeah, I kind of agree with you. A little bit more stuff on business would be a great thing to be able to do as CPD.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in the format of peer reviews, discussion workshops, where you're actually talking to people and sharing ideas of things they've done in practice and what's worked for them and what they've struggled with, I think it can be very, very beneficial from a practice owner's perspective to learn how other people are getting on. They might not chat to other practice owners as much, so there's definitely a lot of benefit from discussing those things with people.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why the GOC pushed that kind of discussion format, and the reason why it's worth 3 points, and the reason why peer review is a requirement to do at least once a year, is that they recognise that there are a lot of optometrists, particularly, but I guess some DOs as well, who own their own practice and work in isolation. They're the only professional working in that practice, and therefore they don't get to throw opinions around and ask other people what they think, and they're working in a little bubble, and you do see these people. I know we're going to talk about fitness to practice later on, but you do sometimes see these people in front of the fitness to practice panel, and typically they're in their 60s and 70s, and they're talking about what they got taught at university. And at university, we were told by Mr. So-and-so that this is what we should do. Yeah. And you think, well, yeah, that's right, but that's 50 years ago, and that's not what we do anymore. And of course, they don't know that, because why would they? They've not been in touch with other people. And I think that's probably now starting to get a bit rarer, because people do get out, and they are almost forced to interact with, well, they are, I suppose, at least once every 3 years, forced to interact with some other people and talk about clinical issues with others. And again, as a provider, you'll have seen this as well. You see for 1 or 2 people at peer review, it's an absolute revelation. You can see that they come out with some slightly odd thoughts, and everybody else says, no, that's not right at all. And then they think, oh, hang on a minute, it's me that's out of step, not all these 9 people.
Yeah, definitely. So touching on the university education side of it again, so obviously had experience as a lecturer. With the way that things are progressing with technology, do you think that the current format for particularly optometry and dispensing optics, coming out of university, does it need to change? Are there elements that need to be sort of overlooked a little bit more and bringing in sort of more modern techniques, modern methods?
It's a difficult one for me to answer that, because obviously I'm not in university anymore and haven't been for a good length of time. So I stopped doing that role about 14, 15 years ago. So, then was very different from now. I mean, even in terms of the way that teaching is delivered, there's a lot more use of technology. When I first started teaching at the University of Bradford, we had PowerPoint on computers, but we had no projectors to project PowerPoint. So what you had to do is make your lecture on PowerPoint, go down to the slide printers, have the slides printed, put them in a carousel, and then take them to the lecture theatre in your carousel and go through the slides. And obviously in the time that I was teaching, I saw a massive change from that to being able to play video and being able to do all the things that you can do on PowerPoint now, just in 5 years probably. And of course now all of the lectures and tutorials are all recorded by default, and I think lots of people don't even turn up for the live one. They just wait for it to get put online and watch it there. So there's been a big revolution in teaching in general. But I think in terms of, technology and practice and things like that, I think people get a little bit overexcited about that, to be honest, because you know, the technology is moving on, and it's moving on rapidly, but it does tend to be evolution. In most cases, it's evolution rather than revolution, isn't it? So, you know, we saw fundus cameras come in, and then they got popular, and most people got them, and then we saw scanning laser ophthalmoscopes come in, and they started to get popular, and then we saw OCTs come in, and they started to get popular. And now you can get these combination things that are doing all three of those all in one unit. And of course, you know, there's the rise of the internet prescribing and testing, and but we've had internet glasses and internet contact lenses around for a long time. So for me, you know, I don't think we need to just say, well, you know, the way that we teach at university is rubbish and we need to throw it away and start all over again. For me, it's more about just making sure that we continue to evolve those training courses so that they are fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And not just the training courses at university, but the CET or CPD schemes to make sure that people are keeping up with current practice. Because, you know, I'm a bit of a dinosaur myself now. I've been an optometrist for 30 years, and if I tried to apply what I learned 30 years ago now, I'd get laughed at. It's all completely different. So yeah, I mean, we don't ever stop learning, do we? It's no good saying you can never say, well, I did that at university and I now know it all, and that's it. I don't need to do any more on that. You have to constantly keep it up to date.
Yeah, definitely. I think with technology, like say the introduction of things like OCT, for instance, maybe that will replace some of the manual skills that you may have had to have perfected to be able to view certain parts of the retina and stuff like that, and certain manual skills perhaps. But then the skill of interpreting them is still an important skill, isn't it? So maybe there'll be a shift from actually doing like a manual function to detect something, and now you're having that detection stage done by technology, but then the skill then becomes in, you know, managing from what you see.
Yeah, but that's always been happening. So when I started in optometry, people used the very first Rycart NCT, that little black unit. I mean, you've probably got to be as old as me to remember it. And Jerem screens for doing visual field. So you know, then we got automated visual field screeners, and we got NCTs that can just do it themselves. You know, you just put it in front of the patient and it aligns it, and it blows a puff of air and gives you a result. And you know, that those things, whilst they're taking away skills in some ways, I mean, I suppose for dispensing opticians, you know, we used to all use manual photometers, and now most practices have an automated photometer, and that photometer just bangs out a result. You still have to know how to use it. You can't just stick a varifocal on it and expect it to return a proper value. And you still have to understand how it's arriving at that value, and why it might be throwing an error. You know, which way around you have to put the glasses, how to measure a front surface ad versus a back surface ad. You know, all of those things, you still have to understand that. You just don't have to turn dials and things, so it's faster. So, you know, with all of these things, they take away skills in one way, but they introduce a different set of skills. And often, as you say, that's interpretation, it's fault finding, troubleshooting. But even some of that's going, isn't it? So even, you know, with artificial intelligence, all of these OCTs and field screeners and things like that will suggest to you whether they think that's normal or not. Yeah. You know, that they're already doing that, and they're going to get better at that. And at the moment, you know, we almost take it with a pinch of salt. We have a look at the result, and it might have some areas highlighted in red or whatever, and you know, we then need to go back to the original figures and pictures and just see why is it doing that, and do we think that that's normal or not. And often you'll find that, yeah, it is normal, even though it's throwing up a red result or an odd result. There's a reason for it, and you can see that in the way that it's acquired its image. But I think, as AI progresses, the AI will do that check for you. And it will become increasingly uncommon to say, well, actually, that's thrown up an error, but I don't think it is anything wrong. I think I know why it's thrown up the error. But I'm sure it'll bring other challenges. You'll have to understand the way that the AI algorithms work and why they're doing what they're doing, and you still need to be able to explain that to the patient and take appropriate action based on the results that you've been presented with. So, I don't think it's. I certainly don't see it as a threat. It's just change. Nobody likes change. But we're all very adaptable, as we've just found out in the last 3 weeks. We can adapt to change incredibly well. Who would have thought that 3 weeks ago we wouldn't have been allowed out other than for one form of exercise and to do one bout of shopping every day? But most people are doing it. Most people are okay with that. We're all on Zoom. Yeah. We're streaming Netflix. We're streaming YouTube. We're online gaming. We're keeping ourselves occupied.
Yeah, definitely. When we were speaking last week to Dr. Jiwa from Canada, she basically said that the biggest difference in converting from her UK qualification to the Canadian qualification was the prescribing element. And obviously we have IP optoms over here. We have people who have got glaucoma certificates, etc., and all that kind of stuff, all that extra learning. So do you think that is something that should be incorporated into a normal optometry degree?
I think it's something that probably just will happen. In Scotland, which is where I'm based at the moment, there are a lot of independent prescribing optometrists, and that's because the Scottish government has funded a scheme run through Glasgow Caledonian University for people to go and do the therapeutics qualification. So I don't know how many it is now, but it's a few hundred out of only just over 1,000 optometrists in the whole of Scotland. So I think it is massively beneficial for optometrists to be able to prescribe, because then if you've got an eye problem, you can just go to your optometrist instead of having to go to your GP. And your GP doesn't have all of this specialist equipment that an optometrist has now. They've probably got a direct ophthalmoscope, and that's about it. No slit lamp, no fields, no OCT, no fundus camera. So, with all of those tools and all of that expertise about eyes, then it makes absolute sense for optometrists to be able to prescribe.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure that will become more common. And I'm sure there are so many universities doing optometry now that some of them are going to want to diversify and offer something different. And, I can see that offering a native therapeutics qualification as part of a degree makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
Surprised it hasn't happened already, to be honest.
Watch this space, hopefully. Okay, so let's have a chat about fitness to practice then. So obviously this is something you're experienced in, not because you've been hauled up in front of the fitness to practice panel, but obviously because you spent some time working on a fitness to practice panel. So tell us a bit about your experiences in that kind of side of optics. How did you get involved in that initially?
Yeah, I'm happy to say I've never been hauled up in front of the fitness to practice panel, but I have had a complaint made against me, and I think a lot of us have. So I don't think you can practice for 30 years without somebody complaining at some point. So yeah, I had a complaint, but it went into the investigative stage and then was thrown out, as I imagined it would be. But yeah, so I sat on the fitness to practice panel in the, I'm just trying to think when, sort of early 2010 probably. So I did it for 8 years. So it would have been late 2000s, early 2010s up to the mid 2010s, something like that. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to do, really. You should certainly get CET points for doing it.
Yeah.
And it's a public. These things are public hearings, so anybody can go along. Nobody does, but you could do if you found yourself at a loose end, and you're in the city of London, which is where the GOC is. You could just turn up at one of these things and watch a bit. I suppose if you're not actually involved in it, it's quite slow progressing. But also very interesting. So yeah, I mean, the way I got involved in that is just I applied, responded to an advert, applied to be a member of the fitness practice panel. The panel is made up of lay people and professionals. So if you are an optometrist, if you found yourself in front of a fitness practice panel, there would be six people actually in front, 6 people on the panel in front of you, only 5 of whom are actually the panel. So 3 of those panel members would be lay people, and the chairperson of that panel would be one of the lay people. And then 2 of the people would be optometrists. And then the 6th person that's there is a barrister who is the legal advisor to the panel. If you're a dispensing optician, then obviously same legal advisor, same lay people, and 2 dispensing opticians. And they hear all sorts from people who are doing things wrong in their professional practice, to all sorts of things: drug addiction, criminal behaviour, fraud, stealing, that sort of stuff.
So what's the actual process? So from the point of complaint, or the point of something being discovered that was done incorrectly, or that kind of thing, what's the actual process up to the point where a decision is made?
So the process is that a complaint's received by the General Optical Council, and they have a look at it, and they decide does it have any substance at all. It might be something which has got nothing to do with the GOC's remit at all. Somebody might just be complaining that they ordered the red glasses and they got the blue glasses, and they won't give them a refund because they're the wrong colour. That would be dealt with by the OCCS. So it's not a professional complaint; it's a contractual complaint, and that would go off to the OCCS. There might be just some really things that are not really complaints at all, and they'd just get rejected straight away. But if there's any sort of hint of substance of a professional issue, then it'll go on to the investigating panel, and they'll have a look at it. They have case reviewers, I think they call it. It's changed a little bit since I did it, but they have people who look at cases, they consider the evidence that's got in front of them, they can write to the parties and get more evidence, and then they'll decide whether it ought to go to a fitness practice or not. That investigating stage takes between 6 months and 9 months, something like that, for that process to happen. If it's going to go to a fitness to practice hearing, first of all, what they'll do is they'll look for, so the investigating panel, if the investigating panel think that it's something really serious, then they can kind of fast track what they call an interim hearing. So they'll very quickly get a hearing together, and they'll hear the facts with or without the registrant present, and they'll decide, whilst this is going through the process, do we need to do something temporarily? So if there's an allegation that, I don't know, sexual abuse or something like that, or something which would put the public at risk, then that obviously is kind of fast tracked through, and we get an interim hearing, and they might decide to suspend that individual whilst this process is ongoing. But in the absence of that, the process goes through. It takes probably 18 months at the moment, 2 years perhaps, to come to what they call a substantive hearing, and it's held very much like a court hearing. So you have the registrant with their own barrister, you have the GOC with their own barrister, you have the panel who are hearing all of the evidence. Witnesses are called. Specialist expert witnesses might be called to present evidence. And once all the evidence has been heard on both sides, then the decision is made.
Okay. So with the initial complaint, so if someone, I mean, do you tend to find that we've obviously got the OCCS, would they escalate to the GOC? If something came to them, would they go through a similar process and then escalate that to the GOC? And then if something's not quite fitness to practice, they refer it back to them.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously the GOC hears a number of complaints directly, but they might come indirectly. So they might come through the OCCS, they might come through the AOP or the college. It might be your employer that passes something on to the GOC. So there are a number of different ways that the GOC can actually find out about a complaint. They can also find out from courts. So if courts know that you are a registered individual, an optometrist or a dispensing optician, then they have a process for reporting you to your professional body. So if you find yourself in court for anything remotely serious, then that will find its way usually back to the GOC. But of course, one of the big ways that the GOC hears about things that you might have done wrong is from yourself. So you do have a duty to inform the GOC if your fitness to practice is impaired, or if you think your fitness to practice might be impaired. So if you are under investigation for a serious crime or at work for a professional issue or whatever, then you really need to think about informing the GOC. You don't do that without taking advice first, and that advice would come from whoever it is that gives you legal protection, probably AMDO or the AOP. But you would consider whether you need to write to the GOC and inform them. And in any case, if you don't, every year they write to you, don't they? And they ask you to re-register. And you have to tick a box to say, I am not under investigation for anything serious, or I am under investigation for something serious. So, once a year, anybody in that sort of situation is going to have to report themselves to the GOC anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very important point to stress to people is the fact that honesty and integrity is a big part of what makes you fit to practice, isn't it, really? So if there's anything that has happened, or if you've had any kind of issue, you're better off not confessing, but owning up to the GOC and reporting it and making them aware, rather than that sort of being found out further down the line. Certainly. Yeah,
and of course, when people talk about fitness to practice, if you don't think about it, when somebody mentions fitness to practice, you think about, as an optometrist, you think about missing glaucoma, missing AMD, missing a retinal detachment, all of those kind of clinical things. That's what you think is the fitness to practice is all about. There are a tiny number of cases. So probably more than half of all of the cases have got nothing to do with any clinical issues at all. So they are professional issues, but they're not clinical issues. So it's people, who committed a crime, sexual misconduct, inappropriate behaviour at work, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, theft from practices. Actually, theft is a big one for dispensing opticians, more so I think than optometrists. And I think that's probably because the dispensing opticians have got more opportunity to take money out of the till or add points to their own loyalty card and things like that, because they're operating the till. So we don't. It's not all fitness to practice isn't just about your ability, your clinical ability as a practitioner. It's about the way that you behave, and you're in a privileged position, really. And people, the general public, look up to professionals. So professionals have gone through an extended education. They have a privileged position in society, generally earn a bit more money than average. you know, and that you're held up to be somebody who is truthful and honest, and you know, you can sign a passport photo to say this is a genuine representation of this person, and you know, I know that because you've got trust in society. But of course, that position, that privileged position, comes with responsibility. So you're expected to behave in a different way to a non-professional, and of course, some of that is in around the way that you practice your profession and the advice that you would give to somebody about eyes. But the other part of that is just in the way that you behave generally. And you know, it might not be a big deal for you know, for a general member of the public to get a police caution for urinating in public. But it is a much bigger deal for a professional. You know, that might be deemed to be bringing the profession into disrepute. So yeah, you just have to be careful all of the time how you behave.
Yeah, definitely. Don't urinate in public. Definitely.
Well, you know, I always try not to. But you know, as a man of advancing age, that's getting increasingly difficult. You know, there are fewer and fewer public toilets around. And when you've got to go, sometimes you've just got to go.
So if we look at a clinical issue, for instance, so if someone was reported to the GOC for missing some kind of pathology, so from the time of that complaint to the time of the hearing, what's the process for the professional? What would be your advice for them?
Well, obviously, if you become aware of a complaint through the GOC, the first thing to do is to phone whoever your legal insurer is. So for most optometrists, that'll be the AOP. For most DOs, that'll be ABDO. If you're employed by one of the big multiples, they will defend you, probably. So you need to let them know as well. So that's the first thing to do. What you definitely must not do is contact the individual who's complaining against you and try and sort it out. It's gone beyond that point. As soon as you've got the GOC involved, then you need to be taking legal advice. And then just follow that legal advice, really. So, you know, the AOP and ABDO are very used to looking after people and advising them in all sorts of different scenarios. So yeah, just take their advice. I mean, one of the things that is important to remember is a fitness to practice panel they're not punitive, so they're not looking to punish you for something. Whereas a criminal court, if you commit a crime, there's an element of punishment, a fine or a prison sentence or something like that, community service or whatever. So there's a punishment for a crime, but for fitness to practice, it isn't about punishment, it's about finding out whether you are fit to practice. So we know that it takes 18 months to 2 years. The GOC would like it to be less, and they're trying various things to make it less, but it still is currently 18 months to 2 years before a fitness to practice hearing comes around. So you've got 2 years to really do something about whatever the issue is. Some of those issues are incredibly difficult to deal with. I mean, you know, if you're suffering from addiction, that is going to be, you know, it's going to be really difficult to try and turn that around in 2 years, but some people do. But if it's a clinical issue, then you've got 2 years to really investigate why that clinical issue arose, how you can prevent it from happening again, to do CET, to do hospital visits, to do retraining in whatever it is. So that when that hearing comes around, they can say, well, you really shouldn't have done what you did, and you've admitted that you shouldn't have done that, and you understand why it is that you did that, and you've put in steps things to stop that from happening again. And so now, actually, we find that you're fit to practice. So often, one of the things that the legal defense will work on is that insight, helping you to develop insight into the problem, and remediation, which is, you know, whatever it is that you need to do to stop it from happening again. And you can even do that for other things, you know, so there are some other things. So I don't know, some kind of inappropriate behavior or something like that, you might be able to have insight into and remediate. For those things that are not clinical, there might still be consequences. So even though, you know, the likelihood of you doing it again is low, so that the public risk is low. The public is not the only thing that fitness to practice is about. So obviously protecting the public is the main one, but also protecting the profession is the other one. So if you've done something bad enough, even though you've remedied it all and you're not ever going to do it again, there has to be some sort of sanction because you did it. And although I started off by saying it's not punitive, it isn't punitive, but it's just that the public it's something that the public wouldn't expect a professional to do. And therefore there has to be a consequence for it, even if you're probably not likely to do it again. So that would reduce the sanction if you've shown full insight and remediation, but you still might get a sanction. And the different sanctions that they can apply are a warning, a fine, although fines are usually only used for companies, corporate bodies. They can put some conditions on your practice. They can suspend you for up to 12 months, and they can erase you from the register.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite an interesting thing to have a look through, isn't it? I mean, all the current fitness to practice hearings are available on the GSE website, so it is interesting to go through some of these cases and read them and see what's actually gone on. And one thing that kind of stand out for me is that where there has been a clinical error, the biggest thing that's affected the outcome of that case is the fact that the OPTOM or the DO has gone back into the record to amend something.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a different thing, isn't it? So honesty is important, and as you've already said, so that, you know, if there's been a clinical mistake and then you go back and you change the record, then obviously you've added an extra thing in. So there's a clinical issue, but now there's also a behavioural issue, and the, you know, going back in to change things is not acceptable unless you're just going back in to add a clarification. So you can go back in and you can add something to a record card as long as it's very clear that it was added afterwards. So you'd need to date it and make it really clear that it is an addition. It wasn't contemporaneous to the rest of the record. And remember that, you know, if you've got electronic record keeping, it knows to the second when you've entered things and whether you did it on the same day or a different day, or whether you've done it under a different login. You know, it knows all of that, keeps a record of all of that. So yeah, just adding dishonesty on top of a clinical issue just makes everything much worse, which is why, you know, we said if you've got a problem, you should take legal advice straight away. You shouldn't try and cover it up. You shouldn't try and contact the individual who's complaining. And honesty is the one that's difficult, because we've said that, you know, if you've got a clinical issue, you can develop insight and you can remediate. You can do that for some professional behaviours as well. But honesty is a really difficult one, isn't it? Because it's really difficult to say, well, I used to be dishonest, but I'm okay now.
Definitely.
Honestly.
It is a tricky one, isn't it? It is a tricky one. So were there any particular cases that stood out during your time, or was there any sort of particular interesting ones that you sat on?
Well, I think it would be wrong of me to discuss cases that I'd sat on, because I have an insight into those beyond what you would get from the public domain. So I think it would be wrong for me to go into those. But as you said, all of the cases are on the General Optical Council's website. If you just go to the hearings section of their website, it has a list of all the future hearings that are going to happen, and then it has a list of all of the ones that happened in the last 12 months with the determination that the Fitness to Practice panel wrote. And they write quite a lengthy determination. So when I first started in the late 2000s, we did write a determination, and it was maybe one side, maybe two sides of A4 if you were lucky. And now I think on average they're about 10 or 11 pages of A4. So they're quite a long essay. But they do set out what decision was reached and how they got to that decision. And that's just in the interest of fairness. So there is an appeal system. So both sides can appeal. The GOC can appeal if they think that the decision was unduly lenient, and the registrant can appeal if they think that the decision was unduly harsh. So it's important that, you know, the appeal has visibility of what the decision was really, and how that decision was reached. So they'll go through various steps. You'll see what the allegations are. You'll hear about a summary of the facts. So that's what the witnesses said and what the written statement said and what the expert witnesses said if they were called, what the registrant said when they were called up as a witness. Then they'll find on fact. So they have to find, are those facts more likely to have happened or not? So it's on the balance of probability, not beyond all reasonable doubt. So on the balance of probability, is it more likely that these facts are right, or is it more likely that they're not right? And so it might end there. So if they find that none of the facts are proven, then the hearing ends there. But if they find the facts are proven, they then have to go on to consider, do those facts amount to misconduct? Sometimes they automatically do. So if the fact is that it is you who was convicted of that serious criminal offence, then if they find on fact, they're going to find on misconduct automatically because there's a criminal offence. If it is, you know, a clinical issue about whether you missed something or whether you didn't, then, you know, they have to go in and look at misconduct. So then they have to go in and say, well, we find those facts to be correct, but is that a professional issue? Would everybody have missed that, or was that something that you did wrong? And again, witnesses might be called and they have information about that. And once they're found on misconduct, they then have to decide on fitness to practice. So they might say, well, there was no misconduct, in which case it ends there. But if they do find misconduct, and often they do, they then go through, is fitness to practice impaired? And that's where they look at, you know, as you sit there before them today, would you act in the same way? So not acting in the same way requires insight, in that you need to understand what you did, and you need to know that what you did was wrong. You need to understand what it was that made you do that in those circumstances. So what circumstances led up to you doing that? And then you need to say, well, how am I going to stop that from happening again? And it's not enough just to say, well, I know it's wrong, therefore I wouldn't do it again. You need to say, given that unique set of circumstances that led up to that, how can I stop those circumstances from resulting in that same outcome again? Yeah. So often, you know, even with a clinical issue, it's not that there's anything inherently wrong in that you don't understand what to do. It's just the circumstances that led you to get there. So you were stressed at home, you had all sorts of issues going on, you were stressed at work, they were making you do tests more often than you wanted to, you weren't getting on with the manager, this particular patient was running behind, you know, so all of those pressures together with your limited understanding of that thing, or what caused the problem. It's rarely just one thing, it's a combination of things.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've then got to say, well, I understand all of those things, and if all of those things all were the same again in future, I would act differently because, and you can say, well, so if you can show all of those things, that's what remediation is.
Yeah.
And if you fit the practice because you understand all of that, then there'll be no sanction. But if they're worried about that, or what you did was so bad that it affects the profession, then there will be a sanction. One of the sanctions that we talked about before.
Yeah, definitely. I think even from a situation that could arise, that could lead to some kind of criminal prosecution, if there's things going on in your life, exceptional things, exceptional circumstances that drive you to a point where, you know, you are highly stressed out, you might end up getting drunk and doing something stupid. These things, it's real life, isn't it? These things can happen. So it's understanding that at that point in your life, those things happen, but obviously you've taken steps and you're in a better place by the time you get to your fitness to practice. Is the important thing, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. And I think what's also important to say is that, fitness to practice cases are incredibly rare. So whilst the number of complaints is somewhere in the 300s, 400s a year. So if we think, how many, there's maybe 20,000 optometrists and dispensing opticians in the UK, and we get in between 300 and 400 complaints every year. If you practice for 40 years, you probably will get a complaint in, just on the law of averages, there are that many complaints coming in. But for that to progress to even to the investigating stage would be relatively rare, and then for that to then go on to a fitness to practice hearing is extremely rare. So there are only, I don't know, in terms of those substantive hearings, maybe 20 or 30 at the most in a year. So it's really, it's unlikely that you'll get a complaint that will progress to investigate, and even more unlikely that you'll go to fitness to practice. And I think, just off the top of my head, about half of the people that end up at fitness to practice get off without any sort of serious sanction. So the likelihood of you getting struck off is very remote. So we shouldn't, we've been talking about all these things that can happen. We should, we've got enough stress at the moment without having to worry about fitness to practice. So yeah, we should reassure people that it is rare for these things to happen. Slightly more likely if you're a man than a woman. More people complain about men than women. But yeah, so don't lose sleep at night worrying about fitness to practice.
Yeah.
There are bigger fish to fry at the moment than that. And I think, we've also said that a lot of it is to do with behaviours. So as long as you can behave like a professional, you're even less likely to have a complaint against you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that due to the length of the process, I think that can be quite daunting for anyone who's sort of had a complaint, because it's a long time to think about something, isn't it? If you're looking at 18 months.
It is, and I think that's a big issue, and it's an important issue, because we all kind of think we're okay at doing our jobs. That's why we do them, because we think we're all right at doing them. We know about what we're doing. We're in control of it. We're doing a good job. And of course, when somebody complains and says you're not doing a good job, and that goes on for weeks and months and years, and you're not sure what the final outcome is going to be, you're pretty sure that actually you're all right, but you're not totally sure that you're going to get off. And people have pointed out errors and flaws in what you've done, and you've tried to remediate those, but you're not sure if you've done enough. It can be an incredibly stressful time. Yeah, and again, I think people like the AOP and ABDO recognise that. So as well as giving you legal support, they'll give you other avenues of support to discuss, what you're going through as well at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the key learnings to take out of that for anyone who's listening is, in the unlikely event that you have a complaint and that you do end up, with fitness to practice, don't sort of worry straight away. Obviously, there are things you can do. There's steps you can take to remediate. There's support out there, through the AOP, through ABDO, through your governing bodies, etc., and your fellow professionals. So there's things you can do to sort of make sure that you come out of the other end of it okay. But be honest. That's probably the biggest thing, isn't it? Always
being open and honest is the biggest piece of advice I can give you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so thank you, Peter. That was really interesting. Hope everyone enjoyed listening to that. It's definitely an interesting insight from someone who's actually worked on the panel as well, and again with the education piece as well. It's interesting to hear someone who's gone through the whole stages, from CET to lecturing, etc. So it's and to have that insight from other professions as well. So thanks for helping us today.
It's been a pleasure. Shouldn't we say click the subscribe button now so that they receive alerts of the new podcast? Available on all popular podcast channels. I just want to say thanks to you, Stuart, and a little plug for you guys as well. I mean, we've talked about ctpoints.com, which is my thing, but Stuart through ICET does a load of peer reviews and workshops, and now runs the eyecare conference in Glasgow in January. So hopefully things will have returned to a semblance of normality by January next year, and we'll all be itching to go. Yeah, I wish you every success in January.
Thank you, and thanks for your support in getting eyecare handed over to us, and you know, and sort of you've been a bit of a mentor for us, definitely. So it's great to have your experience and your thoughts to draw on as well. So thanks for that. We will put bio and stuff like that as well. We'll put links in the comments, and I'll put some on the screen with all the CETpoints.com as well. We've got another one that we're recording very soon, which is going to feature someone that me and Peter know quite well, which is Dan Williams and Jay Sri Vasani. So we're going to be talking all about low vision, and Dan's experience as a low vision patient as well, which would be really interesting to listen to. So thanks for everyone for taking part and listening, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.